The Montana Territory didn't forgive mistakes. Alina learned that the day Marcus didn't come home. She'd waited 3 hours past sunset, dinner cold on the table, before checking the lockbox. Empty. The deed to their 40 acres, still there, worthless as it was. His clothes, gone. The photograph of his mother, gone. Their savings, 7 months of her sewing money and his carpentry wages, gone. The note was brief. Can't do this. Don't follow. She was 23 years old, 6 months pregnant, and owned nothing but a tent, 2 dresses, and land so hostile even the cattlemen wouldn't touch it. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles south. The nearest town, Coldwater, was 12 miles northeast over terrain that turned to soup when it rained and concrete when it froze. Most women would have packed what little remained and caught the next stage back to civilization. Alina Voss had left civilization once before, and it hadn't wanted her then either. She burned the note, packed the tent, and walked to her land. The 40 acres sat in a valley between 2 ridges, backed against a pine forest that grew so dense it looked black from a distance. A creek ran through the eastern edge, cold and clear, fed by snowmelt most of the year. The soil was rocky, the wind cut through the valley like a blade, and the previous owner had died of fever in his first winter. It was hers. She pitched the tent near the creek where the ground was flattest, dug a fire pit, and spent her first night listening to wolves howl in the high country. When dawn broke gray and cold, she walked the property line, counting trees, studying the land's bones. She had no money for lumber, no money for nails, no money for anything except what the earth would give her if she bled for it. So she bled. The first tree took her 4 hours to fell. Her hands blistered, split, bled through the rags she wrapped them in. The axe Marcus left behind was dull, the handle cracked, but it was steel and it was hers. She sharpened it on creek stones, swung until her shoulders screamed, and when the pine finally crashed down, she sat in the dirt and cried for 10 minutes. Then she stood up and started on the next one. By the end of week 1, she had 8 logs. By the end of week 2, she'd figured out how to notch the ends so they'd stack. Her belly was starting to show, a small, hard swell beneath her dress. She let out the seams, ate rabbit she trapped and wild onions she dug, and didn't speak to another human being for 17 days. On day 18, Rhett Calder rode into her clearing. She didn't hear him at first. The axe made too much noise, and her focus had narrowed to the rhythm of the work. Lift, swing, split. Lift, swing, split. The log she was working on had a knot the size of her fist, stubborn and mean. Sweat ran down her spine despite the October chill. "You're going to hurt yourself." The voice came from behind her, male and low. Alina spun, axe raised, and found herself facing a man on a gray horse. He sat easy in the saddle, hands loose on the reins, but his eyes were sharp. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that looked like it had stopped a few fists in its time. He wore working clothes, canvas pants, a wool coat, but they fit too well, and the horse was too fine. Money, then. The kind that didn't have to announce itself. "This is private land," Alina said. Her voice came out rough. She hadn't used it in days. "I know." He didn't move. "I'm Rhett Calder. My family's ranch is south of here." Calder. She'd heard the name in Coldwater. They owned half the valley, ran cattle from the Missouri breaks to the mountain passes. Old money, the kind that came with expectations and enemies in equal measure. "Then you know you're trespassing." "I do." He nodded toward the half-built structure behind her. "That going to be a cabin?" "Unless you've got a better idea for logs." A smile ghosted across his face. "You plan to finish it before snow?" "I plan to try." He studied her for a long moment. She knew what he saw. A woman alone, visibly pregnant, covered in dirt and sawdust, building a cabin with nothing but raw determination and a dull axe. She waited for the pity, for the offer of charity wrapped in condescension. Instead, he said, "You're notching wrong. The weight's going to shift come winter, and your walls will buckle." Alina's jaw tightened. "I'll take my chances." "You'll take a collapsed roof in January." He swung down from the saddle, ground-tied the horse. "Top notch needs to be deeper. Bottom one's fine, but you're not leaving enough overlap." "I didn't ask for your opinion." "No." He walked to the nearest log, ran his hand along the cut. But you're going to get it anyway because I'm not riding back here in February to dig you out of the rubble. Nobody asked you to. Someone should. He looked at her directly then, and there was something in his expression she couldn't name. Not pity. Concern, maybe, but edged with something harder. You out here alone? That's not your business. It is if you're building on the north edge of my family's grazing land. This is my land, deeded and paid for. I know, I checked. He said it casually, like it was normal to investigate your neighbors. Maybe in his world, it was. 40 acres, bought last spring by Marcus Voss. Only nobody's seen Marcus in 3 months, and you're here building a cabin by yourself while you're... He gestured vaguely at her belly. Say it, Alina said flatly. While I'm pregnant and abandoned. That what you're dancing around? His expression didn't change. That what happened? Does it matter? Might, if you need help. I don't. Everyone needs help. Not me. She turned back to the log, raised the axe. Thank you for the architectural advice. You can leave now. He didn't leave. She felt him watching as she swung, felt the weight of his attention like pressure between her shoulder blades. The axe bit into the wood, stuck. She wrenched it free, swung again. Her arms were shaking. She'd been working since dawn, and the sun was past its peak now, starting its slide toward the ridgeline. You eaten today? Rhett asked. Not your concern. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. She heard him move, boot steps on pine needles. When she glanced sideways, he was crouching by her fire pit, prodding the cold ashes. He pulled something from his saddlebag, bread wrapped in cloth, a small wheel of cheese. He set them on a flat stone near the pit. I'm not hungry, Alina said. Wasn't asking. He stood, brushed off his hands. There's a storm coming in tomorrow, big one. You should move your supplies under cover. I'll manage. I'm sure you will. He walked back to his horse, mounted in one smooth motion. But if you change your mind about the notching, I'll be back through here in a few days. Don't bother. He looked at her one more time, and she could have sworn she saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Wasn't planning to ask permission. Then he rode out, and the clearing fell silent again. Alina worked until her hands couldn't grip the axe anymore. Then she sat by the cold fire pit, ate the bread and cheese, and hated that it was the best meal she'd had in a week. The storm hit 30 hours later. It came down from the mountains like judgment, turning the sky black and the air into a solid wall of water. Alina had moved everything she could into the tent, tools, food, the few clothes she owned, but the wind ripped at the canvas like it wanted to tear the whole structure into the sky. Water poured through the seams. By midnight, she was huddled in the driest corner, blanket over her head, listening to the tent poles groan. She didn't sleep. When dawn broke gray and exhausted, half her supplies were soaked, the fire pit was a small pond, and 3 of her logs had rolled down the slope toward the creek. She stood in the mud, water dripping from her hair, and looked at the mess. Then she walked down the slope and started dragging the logs back up. It took most of the morning. The ground was slick, the logs were heavy, and her back screamed with every step. By noon, she had them back in place, but the effort left her dizzy and sick. She sat down hard, head between her knees, waiting for the world to stop spinning. That's when she heard the horse. She looked up. Rhett Calder sat on the ridge line, perfectly still, watching her. How long he'd been there, she didn't know. She pushed herself to her feet, mud-streaked and furious. I didn't ask for an audience, she called up. He rode down slowly, like he was approaching something wild. When he reached her, he didn't dismount, just looked at her, then at the logs, then back at her. You dragged those up by yourself. Nobody else here to do it. You could have lost the baby. But I didn't. His jaw tightened. You're going to kill yourself trying to prove something to nobody. I'm trying to survive, Alina snapped. That's not the same thing. It is when you won't accept help. I don't want your help. Why? Because it makes you weak? Because it means you owe someone? He leaned forward in the saddle. Or because you're so buried in whatever happened before that you'd rather die proud than live beholden? The words hit like a fist. Alina took a step back, breath catching. Get off my land. No. I said, I heard you. He dismounted, slow and deliberate. But I'm not leaving until we settle something. There's nothing to settle. There is.
This story was
Because you're out
posted
here
on the
alone,
channel
pregnant,
West of
trying to
Betrayal.
build a cabin
Please
before
do not
winter with
repost
no
it
help,
in any
no
form.
money, and barely any food, and I can't. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I can't just ride away from that. You don't know me. I know enough. You know nothing. Her voice cracked. You don't know where I came from, or what I've survived, or why I'd rather freeze to death in a tent than accept charity from someone who'll use it against me later. I'm not going to use anything against you. Everyone does. The words hung between them, raw and true. Rhett stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Understanding, maybe. The kind that came from experience. All right, he said quietly. Then we'll make a trade. Alina blinked. What? A trade. You help me with something, I help you with the cabin. No charity, no obligation, just work for work. What could I possibly help you with? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My father wants me married by spring. I need someone to teach me how to tolerate small talk and smile through dinner parties. You look like you've survived worse social situations than that. It was so absurd she almost laughed. You want me to teach you manners? I want you to help me survive a season of being paraded around like a prize bull, and in exchange, I'll make sure your cabin doesn't fall down. He held out his hand. Deal? Alina looked at his hand, then at her half-built cabin, then at the valley stretching out around them. Winter was coming. She knew it in her bones, and pride wouldn't keep her warm, but pride was all she had left. No, she said. His hand dropped. Why not? Because I don't need you to rescue me. I'm not trying to rescue you, Rhett said. I'm trying to make a trade. There's a difference. Not to me. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and walked back to his horse. He mounted, gathered the reins. You're wrong, you know, he said. About what? Accepting help doesn't make you weak. Refusing it when you're drowning just makes you dead. He rode out before she could respond. Alina stood in the mud and watched him go. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of her life. She worked from dawn until her hands bled, then wrapped them and worked longer. The cabin took shape slowly, walls rising log by log, gaps chinked with mud and moss. She built a door frame, hung a piece of canvas for a door, fashioned a small window from salvaged glass she traded her mother's locket for in cold water. The baby grew heavier. Her back ached constantly. Some mornings she couldn't stand without help from a tree trunk. But she stood. The town noticed. Of course they noticed. Coldwater was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and a pregnant woman building a cabin alone was too good a story to ignore. When she went to town for supplies, nails, a saw blade, flour, the whispers followed her down the street. Heard her husband ran off. Shameful, carrying on like that. She should go back to her family. If she had family that wanted her, she'd be with them. Alina kept her head down and her mouth shut. She bought what she needed with the last of her money and walked home. Rhett called her, didn't come back. She told herself she was relieved. Told herself his absence proved she'd been right to refuse his help. Told herself a lot of things while she worked alone in the clearing, belly growing, winter closing in. Then one morning she woke to frost on the ground and couldn't get warm. She built up the fire, wrapped herself in both blankets, but the cold had settled into her bones. Her hands shook when she tried to work. She managed an hour before she had to sit down, dizzy and nauseous. The baby kicked hard, a sharp jab under her ribs. I know, she whispered. I know. She forced herself to stand, to move. Cut wood for the fire. Checked the traps. Nothing. She hadn't caught anything in 3 days. The rabbits had moved to lower ground, following the last of the warm weather. By afternoon, she was too tired to lift the axe. By evening, she was too cold to care. She sat by the fire and watched the flames, trying to remember why she'd been so certain she could do this alone. The answer felt distant now, buried under exhaustion and hunger and bone-deep cold. The sound of hoofbeats brought her head up. 3 riders came into the clearing. Rhett was in the lead, flanked by 2 ranch hands she didn't recognize. They pulled up near her fire, and Rhett dismounted before the horse even fully stopped. He took one look at her and cursed. "When did you eat last?" Alina tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Her teeth were chattering too hard. Rhett turned to one of the hands. "Get the tent down. We're moving her to the line shack tonight." "I'm not," Alina started. "You're hypothermic," Rhett said flatly, "and you're coming with us if I have to tie you to a horse." "You can't. Watch me." He reached for her, and she jerked back. "Don't!" "Alina." Her name in his mouth stopped her. "You're freezing to death. Let me help you." "I don't want—" "I know." His voice was gentler now. "I know you don't. But you're going to die out here if you don't get warm, and I'm not letting that happen." She wanted to fight, wanted to tell him to leave, to let her handle it herself, but the cold had stolen her strength, and the baby was moving too much, frantic kicks that felt like panic. "Just tonight," she heard herself say. "Just until I'm warm." "All right," Rhett said. "Just tonight." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing. She was too tired to protest, too cold to care that she was breaking her own rules. The line shack was small, 1 room, a stone fireplace, 2 bunks. But it was warm. Rhett built up the fire while the hands brought her things from the tent. Someone put a bowl of stew in her hands. She ate without tasting it. When she was warm enough to think clearly again, Rhett was sitting across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you," she made herself say. "You don't have to thank me. I don't have to do anything." The words came out sharper than she meant. "But I'm saying it anyway." He nodded slowly. "You can stay here as long as you need. I'll go back tomorrow." "Alina." "Tomorrow," she repeated. "I'm not abandoning my land. Nobody said you were." "That's what everyone will think." She stared at the fire. The pregnant woman who couldn't handle it, who had to be rescued by the rich rancher, that's the story they'll tell. Let them tell it. Easy for you to say. "Is it?" Rhett's voice was quiet. "You think I don't know what it's like to have every choice dissected by people who've never had to make a hard decision in their lives?" She looked at him then, really looked, saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Your father," she said, "the marriage. He's got it all planned out. Elizabeth Whitmore, senator's daughter. Perfect breeding, perfect manners, perfect wife for a Calder." He said it like he was reciting a list. "We're announcing the engagement at Christmas. Do you love her?" "I barely know her." "Then why agree?" "Because that's what sons do." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "We follow the plan. We do what's expected. We marry the right people and produce the right heirs and pretend it's enough. It doesn't have to be, doesn't it?" He looked at her. "You think I have choices you don't?" "You have money. That's the biggest choice there is." "Money doesn't buy freedom. It just makes the cage more comfortable." He stood, paced to the window. "I've been trying to figure out how to escape it for 10 years. Haven't managed it yet." Alina was quiet for a moment. Then, "So help me finish my cabin. Trade my social graces for your labor. Wasn't that the deal?" He turned. "You turned that down." "I'm reconsidering." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of freezing," she said honestly. "And because maybe you're right. Maybe accepting help doesn't have to mean I'm weak." Rhett crossed the room, crouched in front of her. "It never meant that." "Then we have a deal?" He held out his hand. "We have a deal." This time, she took it. They finished the cabin in 12 days. Rhett worked like a man possessed, up before dawn and swinging an axe until dark. He brought 2 hands with him, Sam and Diego, both quiet men who worked hard and didn't ask questions. They notched logs, raised walls, built a roof frame that wouldn't collapse under snow. Alina worked alongside them when her body allowed it, mixing mud for chinking, sorting supplies, cooking meals over the fire. When the baby made her too dizzy to stand,
This story was
she
posted
sat
on
and
the channel
directed,
west of
pointing out
Betrayal.
weak spots and
Please do
uneven
not
joints.
repost it in any
You've
form.
got a good eye, Sam told her one afternoon. Had to learn fast. Most folks don't learn at all. He nodded toward the cabin. This is solid work. You should be proud. Pride felt strange in her mouth. But when she looked at the structure rising from the land, her land, something loosened in her chest. Rhett noticed. You're smiling, he said that evening after the hands had ridden back to the main ranch. Don't get used to it. I wouldn't dream of it. He was building up the fire, movements efficient and practiced. But it's good to see. What is? You, less like you're ready to take a swing at the world. Alina snorted. Still ready, just too tired to follow through. Fair enough. He settled back against a log, stretching out his legs. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Where'd you learn to build? She was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. My father, she finally said. He was a carpenter, taught me the trade when I was young enough to be useful and too stubborn to quit when it got hard. He's still alive? No, died when I was 16. I'm sorry. Don't be. He drank himself to death, and by the end it was a mercy. She picked up a stick, poked at the fire. My mother remarried 6 months later. Husband number 2 didn't want me around, so I left. Where'd you go? East for a while. Worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia. Then I met Marcus, and he talked about the frontier like it was paradise. Fresh start, he said. Build something that was ours. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Guess he changed his mind about the hours part. Rhett was quiet for a moment. He's a fool. He's practical. I was pregnant, broke, and difficult. Not exactly a prize. That's not... Rhett stopped, shook his head. You really believe that? It's what the world tells me. Then the world's wrong. The certainty in his voice made her look up. He was watching her, firelight casting shadows across his face, and the expression there was so intense it made her chest tight. You don't know me well enough to say that, she managed. Maybe not. But I know you've built half a cabin while pregnant, survived alone in the worst weather I've seen in 5 years, and refused every offer of help until you were literally freezing to death. If that's difficult, I'll take it over easy any day. Something warm and dangerous unfurled in her stomach. You should be careful saying things like that. Why? Because I might start believing them. Good, Rhett said simply. The moment stretched between them, taut as wire. Then the baby kicked hard enough to make Alina gasp, and the spell broke. She pressed a hand to her belly, felt the small foot or fist pushing against her palm. Active tonight, Rhett observed. Always is when I finally sit down. She rubbed the spot, trying to soothe. Think sleep is optional. How far along are you? 7 months, give or take. She didn't mention that she'd stopped keeping careful track. Didn't mention the fear that lived in her bones every time she thought about giving birth alone. Should be born sometime in January. That's soon. I know. And you're planning to do it alone. It wasn't a question. Alina met his eyes. I don't have another option. You could... No. She cut him off. Whatever you're about to suggest, the answer is no. You haven't heard it yet. I don't need to. I'm not going to town to stay with someone. I'm not hiring a midwife I can't afford, and I'm not... She stopped, swallowed hard. I'm not leaving my land. Even if it kills you? Especially then, because then at least it'll be mine. Rhett stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to his saddlebag, and pulled out a small book. He tossed it to her. She caught it awkwardly. What's this? Medical Manual. Has a section on childbirth. Not great, but better than nothing. He sat back down. Read it, learn it, and when the time comes, you send word to the ranch and I'll bring someone who knows what they're doing. Rhett, that's the deal, he said firmly. You want to stay on your land? Fine. But you're not dying because you're too stubborn to ask for help when it matters. And what do you get out of this deal? Peace of mind, and someone to practice small talk with before I'm shackled to Elizabeth Whitmore for the rest of my life. The bitter edge was back in his voice. Alina studied him. You really hate the idea that much? It's not about hate. It's about, he rubbed his face. It's about knowing exactly what your life is going to look like for the next 40 years, and it looking like a cage. So don't do it. You make it sound simple. It is simple, just not easy. There's a difference? Always. She set the medical book aside. Simple means the path is clear. Easy means it doesn't cost you anything. Nothing worth having is ever both. Rhett looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked like hope. Is that what this is for you? The cabin? The cabin, the land, all of it. She gestured at the clearing around them. It's costing me everything, but at least it's mine. Nobody can take it. Nobody can tell me I'm not good enough for it. It's just mine. I envy that. Don't. There's plenty of nights I wonder if I'm insane for trying. But you keep trying. Because the alternative is worse. She met his eyes. And because somewhere in all this misery, I found out I'm stronger than I thought. Maybe even strong enough to survive whatever comes next. The fire burned low between them. Outside, an owl called from the tree line. Thank you, Rhett said quietly. For what? For not letting me pity you. For being exactly as difficult as everyone says. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. And for reminding me that cages only work if you stay in them. Alina felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying and impossibly fragile. She pushed it down hard, buried it where it couldn't hurt her. Cabin should be done by week's end, she said, changing the subject. Then your debt is paid. And the etiquette lessons? Those start after. Assuming you still want them. I do. He stood, stretched. I should get back before someone notices I've been gone all day. They'll notice anyway. Probably, but they'll think I'm checking the herd, not building a cabin with a scandalous pregnant woman. Is that what I am? Scandalous? In the best possible way. He grabbed his hat, settled it on his head. I'll be back tomorrow, early. I'll be here. He mounted his horse, looked down at her. Alina? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're going to be fine. Then he rode out, and she was alone again. But this time, the solitude felt different. This time, it felt like a choice. The cabin was finished 3 days before the first real snow. Alina stood in the doorway and looked at what she'd built, what they'd built, and felt something close to wonder. 4 walls, a roof that wouldn't leak, a stone fireplace that drew smoke properly, a door that closed, a window that let in light. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Rhett had ridden out an hour ago with Sam and Diego, taking their tools and leaving behind a stack of firewood that would last her through December. He hadn't said goodbye, just nodded once and told her he'd be back in a few days. She should have been relieved to see him go. Instead, the clearing felt too quiet. The snow started that night, fat, lazy flakes that drifted down like ash. By morning, the valley was white, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Alina kept the fire burning, rationed her food, and tried not to think about how small the cabin felt when the wind picked up. She spent the days reading the medical manual Rhett had given her. The childbirth section was clinical and terrifying in equal measure. Words like hemorrhage and breech presentation and maternal mortality jumped off the page. She read it anyway, forcing herself to memorize every detail, every warning sign, every piece of advice that might keep her alive when January came. The nights were harder. That's when the fear crept in, cold and insidious. She'd lie on the narrow bunk Rhett had built, one hand on her belly, and imagine all the ways this could go wrong. The baby coming early, the baby not coming at all, dying alone on this mountain with no one to know or care. She'd survived a lot, but surviving childbirth without help was a different kind of gamble. On the 4th day after the snow started, Rhett came back. She heard the horse before she saw him, looked out the window to find him riding through the white landscape like winter couldn't touch him. He had a pack tied behind his saddle, bulky and awkward. Alina opened the door before he could knock. You're going to freeze out there, she said. Good to see you too. He dismounted, started untying the pack. Brought you some things. I didn't ask. I know, but I had them and you need them, so here we are. He carried the pack inside, set it on the table. Flour, salt, dried beef,
This
some
story was
coffee if you're
posted on the
interested.
channel west of
Alina
the trail.
stared at the supplies.
Please do not repost it
Rhett,
in any
I
form.
can't pay for this. Not asking you to. Consider it payment for the lessons. We haven't started the lessons. Then we'll start today. He pulled off his gloves, held his hands toward the fire. Unless you've got something better to do. She should have argued, should have told him to take his charity and leave. But the truth was she was hungry and lonely and tired of pretending she didn't want him there. Fine, she said. But we're doing this properly. You want etiquette lessons? You're going to get etiquette lessons. His smile was quick and genuine. I'm terrified already. They spent the afternoon in the cabin while snow fell outside. Alina made him practice introductions, corrected his posture, taught him how to make small talk without looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was surprisingly bad at it. You're supposed to smile, she said after his third attempt at a simple greeting. I am smiling. That's not a smile. That's what you do right before you tell someone their horse is lame. I don't know how to fake enthusiasm for people I don't care about. Then learn. That's what social survival is. Rhett rubbed his face. How did you get good at this? Practice. And necessity. She sat down across from him. When I worked in Philadelphia, I sewed for wealthy families. You learn fast that a smile and the right words can mean the difference between getting paid and getting thrown out. So you learn to lie. I learned to survive. She met his eyes. There's a difference. Is there? Because it all feels like performance to me. It is performance, but performance doesn't mean it's not real. She leaned forward. You think I wanted to smile at women who treated me like furniture? You think I enjoyed making small talk with men who propositioned me while their wives stood 10 feet away? I did it because I needed the work, because the alternative was starving. And you know what I learned? What? That surviving takes more courage than dying, because dying is quick. Surviving means you have to keep getting up every morning and pretending everything's fine, even when it's not. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you're doing here? Pretending? No. The word came out firm. Here I don't have to pretend. The land doesn't care if I smile. The cabin doesn't judge me. It just is. And that's worth more than all the polite conversation in the world. Then why teach me to fake it? Because you made a deal. And because... She stopped, looked away. Because maybe if you learn to play their game, you can figure out how to win it, or at least survive it long enough to find a way out. You think there's a way out? There's always a way out. You just have to be willing to pay the price. He studied her face. What price did you pay? Everything. She stood, walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling harder. My family, my reputation, any chance at a normal life, I paid it all, and you know what? I'd do it again, because this... She gestured at the cabin, at the valley beyond. This is mine, and nobody can take it from me. Rhett stood, came to stand beside her. They watched the snow fall together, shoulders almost touching. Elizabeth's father is coming to the ranch next week, he said quietly. Wants to finalize the engagement. Are you going to do it? I don't know. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. That's the hell of it. I've known for months this was coming, and I still don't know what I'm going to do. What do you want to do? Run. Just get on my horse and ride until I hit an ocean. So do it. It's not that simple. Why not? Because... He stopped, jaw tight. Because my father built that ranch from nothing. Because my mother died when I was 10 and he raised me alone. Because walking away means spitting on everything they sacrificed to get here. Or it means choosing your own sacrifice instead of living theirs. He looked at her then, really looked, and the expression on his face made her chest ache. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just too tired to lie anymore. She turned away from the window. You should go. Storm's getting worse. I should. But he didn't move. Alina? Yeah? Can I ask you something that's none of my business? You're going to anyway. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this? She thought about lying. thought about giving him the answer that would make this easier, but she just told him she was done lying, and she meant it. "Every day," she said. "Every single day, I wake up and wonder if I made a mistake. If I should have gone back east. If I should have found some man who'd take me in despite the baby. If I should have done anything except this." She pressed a hand to her belly. "But then I remember what it felt like to have nothing that was mine, to live at someone else's mercy. And I know, even if this kills me, at least I'll die free." Rhett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I hope it doesn't kill you." "Me too." He left a few minutes later, riding out into the storm. Alina watched from the window until he disappeared into the white, then closed the curtain and tried not to think about how much she'd wanted him to stay. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Rhett would ride up every few days, bringing supplies and excuses. He needed to check the northern fence line. His father wanted him to survey the grazing land. The hands had reported wolf tracks near the ridge. They both knew he was lying, and they both pretended they didn't. The etiquette lessons continued, strange and surreal in the tiny cabin. Alina taught him how to navigate a formal dinner, how to dance without looking miserable, how to make conversation with people who bored him senseless. He was a terrible student, too honest, too direct, too unwilling to soften his edges. She liked him for it. "You're supposed to compliment her dress," Alina said one afternoon. "Not tell her it's impractical." "But it is impractical. Who wears something that tight to a dinner party?" "Someone who wants to be admired, not critiqued." "That's stupid." "Welcome to society." She bit back a smile. "Try again. I walk into the room wearing an elaborate gown. What do you say?" Rhett looked at her, really looked, in a way that made her suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how small the cabin was, how alone they were on this mountain. "I'd say you don't need an elaborate gown," he said quietly. "You're beautiful enough without it." The air between them went still. "That's," Alina's voice came out rough, "that's not what you say to someone you barely know." "Then what do I say to someone I'm starting to know?" "Rhett, because I think about you," he continued, like he couldn't stop now that he'd started. "When I'm at the ranch, when I'm listening to my father talk about Elizabeth and the wedding and the future he's planned for me. I think about you up here alone, and I wonder if you're warm enough, if you're eating enough, if you're—" "Stop." She stepped back. "You have to stop." "Why?" "Because you're engaged, or about to be, and I'm—" She gestured at herself. "I'm pregnant with another man's child. There's no version of this that ends well. Maybe I don't care." "You should," her voice cracked. "You should care, because I won't be the reason you destroy your life. What if my life is already destroyed? Then fix it, but not with me." She turned away, pressed her palms against the table. "This is just proximity, isolation. You're mistaking gratitude for something else." "Don't tell me what I'm feeling." "Someone has to, because you're clearly not thinking straight." She spun back to face him. "In 3 weeks, you're going to announce your engagement to a senator's daughter. You're going to marry her in the spring and have beautiful children and live the life your father wants for you. And I'm going to be here, alone, raising a baby that isn't even yours. That's reality. Everything else is just fantasy." "And what if I don't want reality?" "Then you're a fool." The word hung between them, sharp and final. Rhett stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight, something raw and hurt in his eyes. "Maybe I am," he said. Then he grabbed his coat and walked out. Alina stood in the empty cabin and listened to the sound of hoofbeats fading into distance. She told herself she'd done the right thing, the smart thing, the thing that would protect them both, but it felt like she'd just cut something vital out of her chest. He didn't come back for a week. The silence was worse than she'd expected. The cabin felt smaller without his presence, the days longer, the nights colder. She threw herself into preparing for the baby, washing the few pieces of cloth she had, reading the medical manual until she had it memorized, trying not to think about January. The town noticed the change, too. She went to Coldwater for supplies 3 days after Rhett stopped coming. The whispers were louder this time, less careful. She heard Calder and Scandal and Shameless, as she walked past the general store. When she reached the counter, the clerk's wife looked at her with something between pity and disgust. "Heard Rhett Calder's been
This
spending
story
time
was
at your
posted
place,"
on the channel
woman
west
said.
of Betrayal.
Alina kept her
Please
face
do not
blank.
repost it
He
in
helped
any
with the
form.
cabin. I'm sure that's all it was. The woman's smile was razor thin. Still, people talk, especially with his engagement coming up. Then people should find something more interesting to discuss. Hard to do when the most eligible bachelor in the county is visiting a pregnant widow alone. "I'm not a widow." The woman's eyebrows rose. "No? Then where's your husband, dear?" Alina set her money on the counter, took her supplies, and walked out without another word. The whispers followed her all the way down the street. That night, alone in the cabin, she finally let herself cry. Not for the gossip, she'd survived worse, but for the realization that even here, even in this place she'd built with her own hands, she couldn't escape other people's judgments. The knock on her door 2 days later made her jump. She opened it to find a woman she didn't recognize. Mid-50s, stern face, expensive coat. Behind her, a younger woman waited by a carriage, radiating discomfort. "Alina Voss?" the older woman said. "Who's asking?" "Margaret Calder, Rhett's mother." She stepped forward. "May I come in?" Alina's stomach dropped, but she moved aside. Margaret entered, eyes sweeping the cabin with undisguised assessment. The younger woman followed, and Alina realized with a sinking feeling who she was. "This is Elizabeth Whitmore," Margaret said, "Rhett's fiancée." Elizabeth was beautiful in the way only the very wealthy could be. Porcelain skin, perfect posture, clothes that cost more than Alina's entire cabin. She looked around the space like she'd stepped into a barn. "Mrs. Calder," Alina said carefully, "what can I do for you?" "You can stop seeing my son." "Direct then." Alina almost respected it. "I'm not seeing your son." "Don't insult my intelligence. Rhett's been riding up here for weeks. The whole county knows it. He helped me build my cabin, that's all." "Is it?" Margaret's eyes were hard. "Because he's been distracted, distant. And when I mention his upcoming engagement, he looks like a man being led to the gallows." "That's not my problem. It is when you're the distraction." Margaret stepped closer. "I don't know what you said to him or what you're hoping to gain from this. I'm not hoping to gain anything, but it stops now. Rhett has responsibilities, a future. He doesn't need some pregnant drifter filling his head with romantic nonsense." The words hit like a slap. Alina felt her spine straighten, her jaw tighten. "Get out of my house." "Not until we're clear." "We're clear? You think I'm trying to trap your son? You think I'm some kind of, schemer? Gold digger?" Alina laughed, harsh and bitter. "Look around, Mrs. Calder. Do I look like I'm after anyone's money?" "You look desperate, and desperate women do desperate things." "You're right, I am desperate. I'm desperate to survive the winter, desperate to give birth without dying, desperate to build something that can't be taken from me." She moved to the door, opened it. "But I'm not desperate enough to ruin someone else's life for my own comfort. So you can tell your son and his perfect fiancée that they have nothing to worry about. I'm not interested." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You're lying." "Excuse me?" "You care about him. I can see it." The older woman's voice softened slightly. "Which is why I'm asking you, woman to woman, let him go. He'll do the right thing eventually, but only if you stop giving him an excuse to run." Alina looked at Elizabeth, who'd been silent through the entire exchange. The younger woman looked miserable, standing in the corner like a prop in someone else's drama. "Does she even want to marry him?" Alina asked. Margaret frowned. "That's not relevant." "It's the only thing that's relevant." Alina turned to Elizabeth. "Do you want to marry Rhett Calder?" Elizabeth's eyes widened. That's not..." "Simple question, yes or no." "It's a good match," Elizabeth said, the words rehearsed. "Our families..." "That's not what I asked." Elizabeth looked at Margaret, then back at Alina. Something shifted in her expression, a flash of real emotion breaking through the perfect facade. "No," she said quietly. "I don't, but it doesn't matter what I want." "It should." "Should and does are different things, Miss Voss." I'm sure you understand that. Alina did, better than either of them knew. Tell Rhett I wish him well, she said to Margaret. Tell him the cabin's finished and the debt is paid. And tell him, she stopped, swallowed hard. Tell him thank you. Margaret nodded once, sharp and satisfied. Come along, Elizabeth. They left in a swirl of expensive fabric and cold air. Alina closed the door and leaned against it, feeling like she'd just fought a battle she didn't even know she'd entered. That night, the baby kicked so hard she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark and wondered if this was what drowning felt like, going under slowly, knowing you should fight but too tired to try. Rhett came back 3 days before Christmas. She was outside splitting wood when she heard the horse. Her back ached. Her hands were numb, and she was so tired she could barely lift the axe. But the wood needed splitting, so she split it. He dismounted without a word, took the axe from her hands, and started splitting the pile himself. They worked in silence, him splitting, her stacking, until the pile was done and the sun was starting to set. My mother came here, he said finally. I know. What did she say? What mothers say, that I'm a distraction, that you have responsibilities. Alina picked up an armload of wood. She's not wrong. She's completely wrong. Is she? Alina turned to face him. You are distracted. You do have responsibilities, and I am, she gestured at herself, everything she thinks I am. You're not. Then what am I, Rhett? The question came out harder than she meant. Because I don't know anymore. I don't know if I'm brave or just stubborn, if I'm surviving or just taking longer to die. I don't know anything except that being around you makes it harder to remember why I'm supposed to be doing this alone. He stepped closer. Maybe you're not supposed to. Don't. She backed away. Don't make this harder than it has to be. It's already hard. Then let's make it easier. You go back to your ranch. You marry Elizabeth. You live the life you're supposed to live. And you? I'll be fine. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She was crying now, angry tears that she couldn't stop. I can't be what you want me to be. I can't be the reason you throw everything away. I won't. He kissed her. It was brief and desperate and completely wrong. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I'm sorry, Rhett said. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. But she didn't move away. You're engaged. Not yet. Close enough. Alina, you need to leave. Her voice shook. You need to leave and not come back. I can't do that. You have to, because if you don't, we're both going to do something we can't take back. She pressed her hands to her face. Please, Rhett, please just go. He stood there for a long moment, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. This time, Alina knew he wasn't coming back. And this time she understood exactly what she'd lost. Christmas came and went in silence. Alina spent it alone in the cabin, watching snow fall past her window and trying not to count the days until January. The baby had dropped lower, pressing against her hips in a way that made walking painful. She moved slowly now, carefully, like her body was something fragile that might shatter if she pushed too hard. She'd stopped going to town, couldn't face the whispers, the looks, the weight of other people's judgment. She had enough food to last through winter if she was careful, enough firewood if she rationed it, enough solitude to drive her half mad. The medical manual sat on the table, pages worn from repeated reading. She'd memorized every word about childbirth, every warning, every instruction. It didn't make her less afraid. On the third day after Christmas, someone knocked. She opened the door expecting Rhett, hoping for Rhett, and found Sam instead. The ranch hand stood in the snow, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. Miss Voss, he said, got a message from the boss. Her heart kicked hard. Rhett sent you? No, ma'am, Mr. Calder Sr. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, asked me to deliver this. Alina took the letter, cold spreading through her chest. Thank you. Sam nodded, started to leave, then stopped. Miss Voss? For what it's worth, we all think you did a real good job on that cabin. Not many folks could have done what you did. Thank you, Sam. He rode off, and she closed the door before opening the letter. The handwriting was neat, precise, nothing like Rhett's scrawl. Miss Voss, I
This
understand my
story
son
was
has been
posted
assisting
on the
me with
channel west
construction.
of Betrayal.
As this arrangement
Please
has
do not
concluded,
repost it
I
in any
trust there will
form.
be no further need for contact between you. Rhett's engagement to Miss Whitmore will be announced at the New Year's ball. I expect you to respect the boundaries appropriate to your respective positions. Enclosed is compensation for any labor you provided in exchange for his assistance. Consider all debt settled. Thomas Calder. A bank draft fell out when she unfolded the letter. $50. More money than she'd seen in months. She tore it in half and threw it in the fire. The anger came hot and fast, burning away the numbness she'd wrapped around herself. Thomas Calder thought he could buy her silence, her compliance, her acceptance of the way things were supposed to be. Thought $50 would make her forget that his son had looked at her like she mattered, that for a few weeks she'd felt less alone. She crumpled the letter and threw it in after the money, watched the paper curl and blacken. Then she sat down hard because her back was screaming and the baby was kicking, and she was so tired of being angry she could barely breathe. 3 days later, the contractions started. Not the real thing. She knew that from the manual. Practice contractions, her body getting ready for what was coming. They hit irregular and sharp, stealing her breath for 30 seconds before releasing. She worked through them, moving slowly around the cabin, keeping the fire going, trying not to panic. It was too early. Still 2 weeks until her best guess at when the baby should come. 2 weeks that felt like an eternity and no time at all. That night, the contractions got worse. She lay on the bunk, hands pressed to her belly, counting seconds between each wave. 30 minutes apart, then 20, then 15. The medical manual said this could last for days, the practice giving way to the real thing gradually or all at once. It said to stay calm, to conserve energy, to have help nearby. She had none of those things. By dawn, the contractions were 10 minutes apart, and she knew practice was over. She tried to stand and her legs wouldn't hold her, tried to think through the pain and found her mind fuzzy, distant. The manual said there would be time, hours, maybe a full day for a first baby. Time to prepare, to get help. The contraction hit like a fist, doubling her over. She gasped, clutching the edge of the bunk, and felt something give way inside her. Warm liquid soaked through her dress, pooling beneath her. Her water had broken. She needed help. Needed someone, anyone. The ranch was 8 miles south. Town was 12 miles in the other direction. She couldn't walk 8 feet without collapsing. The medical manual was on the table, too far away to reach, but she'd memorized it. She knew what came next. Labor would progress faster now. Contractions closer together. The baby coming whether she was ready or not. She pulled herself back onto the bunk, positioned the blankets beneath her. Her hand shook as she gathered the few supplies she'd prepared. Clean cloth, a knife sterilized in boiling water, cord for tying. Everything the manual said she needed, laid out like it would be enough. The next contraction came 5 minutes after the last. Alina bit down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming. The hours blurred together after that, pain and pressure, and the terrible certainty that she was going to die up here alone. The contractions came faster, harder, ripping through her in waves that left her gasping. She tried to remember the breathing techniques the manual described, tried to stay calm, but calm was impossible when your body was tearing itself apart. At some point, she didn't know when, the urge to push became overwhelming. She bore down, gripping the bunk frame, and felt the baby move. Felt progress. Then the contraction ended and she collapsed back, panting. Another contraction, another push. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond anything she thought a person could survive. But she was surviving it because she had no other choice. Outside, the wind picked up. She heard it howling around the cabin, rattling the window, and realized dimly that another storm was coming. The temperature was dropping. If she died here, if the baby died, they'd freeze before anyone found them. The thought made her push harder. She lost track of time. Lost track of everything except the relentless rhythm of contraction, push, breathe. Contraction, push, breathe. Her body knew what to do, even if her mind had fled somewhere beyond the pain. Then she felt the baby crown. The sensation was fire and pressure, and too much, impossibly too much. She reached down with shaking hands and felt the baby's head, real and solid and terrifyingly fragile. One more push, just one more. She bore down with everything she had left, and the baby came free in a rush of fluid and relief so intense she sobbed. For a moment there was only silence. Then the baby cried, thin and angry and alive. Alina pulled the infant onto her chest with trembling hands. A girl. She had a daughter. The baby was small and slippery and covered in vernix, her face scrunched up in outrage at being born into this cold world. "I've got you," Alina whispered. Her voice was wrecked, her body destroyed, but she'd never felt anything as powerful as this moment. "I've got you." She delivered the afterbirth in a haze, cut and tied the cord the way the manual instructed, wrapped the baby in the cleanest cloth she had. The infant found her breast instinctively, latched on, and the sensation was painful and perfect and made her cry again. She'd done it, done the impossible thing alone. But she wasn't out of danger yet. The bleeding was heavy, soaking through the blankets beneath her. The manual said some bleeding was normal, but this felt like too much. She pressed cloth against herself, trying to staunch the flow, but her hands were weak, and the cloth kept coming away red. The storm outside had turned vicious. Wind shook the cabin walls. Snow came down so thick she couldn't see past the window. The temperature inside was dropping despite the fire. She needed to get up, to add wood, to keep them warm. She couldn't move. The baby nursed, oblivious to the danger. Alina held her daughter close and tried to stay conscious, tried to think of what to do next. But the blood loss was making her dizzy, making the edges of the world go soft and gray. She was going to die anyway. The thought came calm and certain. She'd survived the birth, but she wouldn't survive the bleeding, wouldn't survive the cold and the storm and the brutal arithmetic of being alone. Her daughter would freeze in this cabin, still wrapped in her mother's arms. No. The word came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. She'd fought too hard to give up now. Fought too hard to let her daughter die because she couldn't stand up. Alina gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright. The world spun. She held the baby against her chest with one arm, used the other to pull herself along the bunk. 3 feet to the edge. Another 4 to the fireplace. She could do this. She had to do this. She made it halfway before her legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, turning at the last second to protect the baby. Pain exploded through her side, but the infant was safe, still breathing, still crying softly. Alina lay there, vision graying at the edges, and knew she was out of options. The fire was dying. She could see it from where she lay, flames guttering down to coals. Without more wood, it would be gone in an hour. The cabin would freeze. They would freeze. She'd survived Marcus leaving, survived building the cabin, survived childbirth alone. But she couldn't survive this. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her daughter. "I'm so sorry." That's when she heard the horse. At first she thought she was hallucinating, thought the blood loss had finally pushed her over the edge into delirium. But the sound came again, hoofbeats outside, muffled by snow, then stopping, footsteps on the porch. The door burst open. Rhett stood in the doorway, covered in snow, his face a mask of horror when he saw her on the floor. "Alina." He was across the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands moved over her, assessing, and when he pulled them back they were covered in blood. "What? When?" "The baby," she managed. "Take the baby." He looked down and seemed to notice the infant for the first time. His expression went through shock, realization, fear, and something else she couldn't name. He pulled off his coat, wrapped it around both of them. "How long ago?" "I don't know. Hours." Everything was fuzzy now. "She's okay, but the bleeding. I know. I see it." He was already moving, gentle but efficient. He lifted her back onto the bunk, positioned blankets beneath her, pressed clean cloth against the bleeding. His hands were steady, but his face was pale. "Why didn't you send for me?" "You weren't supposed to come back. Screw what I was supposed to do." He kept pressure on the wound, his other hand checking her pulse. "I was 10 miles out when the storm hit. Knew you were up here alone. Knew." His voice cracked. "I knew something was wrong." "How did you ride through this?" "I know every inch of this valley." He glanced at the dying fire, cursed. "I need to get that going. Can you hold pressure here?" She tried. Her hands were too weak. He put her hands over the cloth anyway, covered them with his own. Keep pressing. I'll be right back. He moved fast, building up the fire until heat flooded the cabin again. Then he was back at her side, taking over the pressure, his face grim.
This story was posted on the
bleeding's
channel
not
west
stopping,
of
he
Betrayal.
said.
Please do not
I know.
repost it in any form.
Alina, I know. She looked at her daughter, sleeping now against her chest. Take care of her. Promise me. You're not dying. Promise me. No. His voice was hard. You're not doing this. You don't get to survive all of this just to give up now. I'm not giving up. I'm bleeding out. There's a difference. He stared at her, jaw tight, then made a decision. He grabbed the medical manual from the table, flipped through it with bloody fingers until he found what he needed. There's a technique here, he said, for postpartum hemorrhage. It's going to hurt. Everything hurts. This will be worse. He looked at her directly, but it might save your life. Do it. He worked quickly, following the manual's instructions with hands that had delivered countless calves and foals, but never a human baby, never this. Alina bit down on the leather strap again and tried not to scream. The pain was immense, but different from the birth, sharper, more focused. And slowly, impossibly, the bleeding slowed. Rhett kept working until he was satisfied, then wrapped her tightly to maintain pressure. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. You scared the hell out of me, he said quietly. Wasn't the plan. What was the plan? Give birth alone in a blizzard and hope for the best? That was pretty much it. She tried to smile, but her face wouldn't cooperate. Didn't account for you showing up. I'll always show up. He said it like a vow. You understand that? No matter what my father says, no matter what's expected of me, if you need me, I'll be here. You can't promise that. I just did. The baby stirred between them, making small noises. Rhett looked down at the infant, and his expression transformed into something Alina had never seen before. Wonder mixed with terror. She's so small, he whispered. She's perfect. What's her name? Alina realized she hadn't thought about it, hadn't let herself think about it because thinking about names meant thinking about a future, and she'd been too focused on surviving to plan for anything beyond the next hour. I don't know yet. She needs a name. Then help me think of one. They sat in the warm cabin while the storm raged outside, passing names back and forth like a prayer. Nothing felt right. Every name Alina suggested sounded too soft, too fragile for a girl born into this harsh world. Every name Rhett suggested sounded too formal, too much like the life he was supposed to be living. Finally, Alina said, Rose. Rhett looked at her. Why Rose? Because roses survive winter. They look delicate, but they're not. They're tough, stubborn. She smoothed her hand over the baby's dark hair, and when they bloom, they're beautiful enough to make you forget how hard they fought to get there. Rose, Rhett repeated. He reached out, let the baby's tiny hand wrap around his finger. It's perfect. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, while the storm tried to tear the world apart outside. When the bleeding finally stopped completely, Rhett made her drink water, eat a little of the dried beef he'd brought in his saddlebag. She was weak, wrung out, but alive. Rose nursed and slept, her small body warm against Alina's chest. I have to tell you something, Rhett said eventually. He was sitting on the floor next to the bunk, close enough to reach, but not touching. The engagement announcement is tomorrow night. Alina's chest tightened. I know. I'm not going. Rhett, I'm not going, he repeated, harder this time. I can't stand in that ballroom and announce I'm marrying someone I don't love while you're up here bleeding out alone. I can't do it. Your father can disown me. I don't care. You will. When the money's gone and the ranch is lost and you're with you. He looked at her directly. I'll be with you. That's all that matters. It's not all that matters. What about Elizabeth? What about... Elizabeth doesn't want to marry me any more than I want to marry her. She told me last week. He ran a hand through his hair. She's in love with someone else, a clerk in her father's office. Been seeing him in secret for a year. The engagement was her father's idea, not hers. Alina stared at him. Then why agree to it? Same reason I did. Because saying no means losing everything. He leaned forward. But I'm saying no anyway. Tomorrow, at that ball, I'm going to stand up and tell my father and everyone else that I won't be marrying Elizabeth Whitmore, that I'm walking away from the ranch, the money, all of it. And then what? Then I come back here. I help you raise Rose. I build a life that's mine instead of one someone else planned for me. He reached out, took her hand. If you'll have me. Rhett, I'm still married. The words dropped between them like stones. She'd been avoiding saying it, avoiding even thinking about it, but it was true. Marcus had left, but he hadn't filed for divorce. Legally, she was still his wife, still bound to a man who'd abandoned her. Rhett's expression didn't change. Then we'll find him. We'll make him sign papers, however long it takes. And until then? Until then, we survive. Together. He squeezed her hand. Unless you don't want me here. That's not... She stopped, looked at him, really looked. At his face, exhausted and determined. At his hands, still stained with her blood. At the way he'd positioned himself between her and the door, like he could protect her from whatever came next. I'm going to ruin your life. Or save it. Same thing, maybe. Then let's be ruined together. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. What do you say? Alina looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully despite the storm, despite everything. Looked at the cabin she'd built with her own hands. Looked at Rhett, who'd ridden through a blizzard because he couldn't stay away. She thought about strength, about what it meant to survive alone versus surviving together, about the difference between dependence and choice. I say, she took a shaky breath, I say you better be sure, because if you do this, if you walk away from everything, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything. Your father will hate me. He already does. The town will talk. Let them. We'll have nothing. We'll have each other, and this cabin, and 40 acres that nobody wanted until you made them worth something. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. That's more than most people get in a lifetime. She wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in his logic, the reason this couldn't work, but she was too tired and he was too close, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, louder this time, but I'm not going to make this easy. I'd be disappointed if you did. He stood, stretched. I should let you rest. Storm's dying down. I'll head back before dawn, make my announcement, pack my things. When will you come back? Tomorrow night, with everything I can carry. He looked around the cabin. We'll need to expand this place. Rose is going to need her own room eventually. One crisis at a time. Fair enough. He moved toward the door, stopped. Alina? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For letting me stay. He opened the door, cold air rushing in. For giving me a reason to leave. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkened snow. Alina lay in the bunk with Rose warm against her chest and listened to the storm fade. Her body ached, her heart hurt, and everything about the future was uncertain. But she wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, impossibly, that made all the difference. Rhett didn't come back the next night. Alina told herself not to panic, told herself there were 100 reasons he might be delayed. The roads were bad. The confrontation with his father had taken longer than expected. He was gathering supplies. But as the hours stretched and Rose cried and her body ached from the birth, fear crept in cold and familiar. He'd changed his mind. Realized what he was giving up. Decided a cabin and a woman with another man's baby wasn't worth throwing away his inheritance. She wouldn't blame him. She'd blame herself for believing, even for a moment, that this could work. The second night, she heard horses. Multiple horses. Alina struggled to the window, Rose bundled against her chest, and saw 3 riders coming up through the trees. Rhett was in the lead, but the other 2 weren't ranch hands. One was Elizabeth Whitmore. The other was a man Alina didn't recognize. Thin, nervous-looking, clutching the reins like he'd never been on a horse before. Alina opened the door as they dismounted. Rhett's face was haggard, a bruise darkening his left cheekbone. Elizabeth looked windblown and exhilarated. The thin man just looked terrified. "What happened to your face?" Alina asked. "My father has a good right hook." Rhett touched the bruise, winced. "Worth it, though." "Rhett, let's get inside."
This
It's a long
story was posted on the channel
They
west
crowded
of
into the
Betrayal.
small cabin.
Please
Too
do not
many people for the
repost it
space,
in any
but Alina
form.
was too weak to stand for long, so she sat on the bunk and let them arrange themselves. Elizabeth took the chair. The thin man stood by the door looking like he wanted to bolt. Rhett crouched by the fire, building it up. "This is James," Elizabeth said, gesturing to the nervous man. "James Kirkland. We're leaving for California tomorrow." Alina blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's a long story," Rhett said again. He finished with the fire, turned to face her. "The ball went about as well as you'd expect." "Meaning?" "Meaning I stood up in front of 200 people and announced I wasn't marrying Elizabeth, that I was walking away from the ranch, that anyone who had a problem with it could go to hell." He smiled, but it was tight. "My father had several problems with it. Hence the face. Hence the face. He threw me out. Told me if I left, I was never welcome back. That he'd rather the ranch go to distant cousins than to a son who'd disgrace the family name." Rhett shrugged like it didn't matter, but Alina could see the tension in his shoulders. "So I left." "And took Elizabeth with you?" "That was my idea," Elizabeth said. She reached for James's hand, pulled him closer. "When Rhett made his announcement, I realized, if he could walk away, so could I. So I stood up and told everyone the engagement was off because I was in love with someone else. Then I grabbed James and we ran." "Her father's probably organizing a search party as we speak," James added nervously. "Definitely organizing a search party," Elizabeth corrected, "which is why we need to leave tonight. We're heading to California. James has a cousin there who will help us get started. And Rhett," she looked at him, "Rhett gave us his horse and the money he'd saved, enough to get us there and survive until we find work." Alina stared at Rhett. "You gave them your money? I don't need it. I've got hands that work and land that's already claimed." He met her eyes. "And I've got you. If you'll still have me." "You're insane." "Probably." He stood, walked closer. "But I'm here, and I'm staying, unless you're going to throw me out." She wanted to tell him this was crazy, that he'd just destroyed his entire life for something that might not even work. But Rose was stirring against her chest, and Rhett was looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted sideways, and she was too tired to fight. "You can stay," she said quietly. "But you're building your own bunk. This one's crowded enough." Relief flooded his face. "Deal." Elizabeth stood, brushed off her expensive riding dress. "We should go. We want to be past the county line by morning." She walked to Alina, looked down at Rose. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "Rose." "That's perfect." Elizabeth touched the baby's tiny hand. I hope you find whatever you're looking for up here. Both of you. I hope you do too." "We will." Elizabeth glanced at James, and the look between them was so full of hope and terror it hurt to see. "Or we'll die trying." They left in a rush of goodbyes and good lucks, James still looking like he couldn't believe what was happening. Alina and Rhett watched from the doorway as the two riders disappeared into the darkness, heading west toward a future that was as uncertain as it was their own. When they were gone, the cabin fell quiet. "Your father really disowned you," Alina said. "He really did. And you're okay with that?" Rhett closed the door, leaned against it. "Ask me in a year. Right now I'm too angry to know if I'm okay." He touched his bruised face again. "He said some things. About you. About Rose. About what kind of man would throw away his family for—" He stopped, jaw tight. "For what?" "A whore and her bastard." The words came out flat. Those were his exact words. Alina flinched. She'd been called worse, but hearing it repeated in Rhett's voice made it fresh again. He's not wrong about the bastard part. "Don't." Rhett crossed the cabin in 3 strides. "Don't do that. Don't take his poison and swallow it. It's not poison if it's true. It's not true. Rose is... He looked at the baby, and something in his expression shifted. Rose is yours. That's all that matters. The law doesn't see it that way. Then the law's wrong. He sat down heavily in the chair Elizabeth had vacated. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what my father says. I'm here because I want to be here. Because when I think about my future, this is what I see. You and Rose and this cabin and 40 acres of land nobody else wanted. That's a terrible future. It's the only one I want. They stared at each other across the small space. Rose made a small sound, and Alina looked down to find the baby watching her with dark, serious eyes. 7 hours old and already skeptical of the world. Smart kid. We need to talk about the practical things, Alina said. Money, food, how we're going to survive. I've got some savings my father doesn't know about, hidden in town. Enough for supplies and seed come spring. How much is some? $200. Alina's breath caught. That's not some. That's a start. Not enough to live on forever, but enough to get us through until we can make this place profitable. He leaned forward. I've been thinking about it. Your 40 acres backs onto public land. If we file the right claims, we could expand to 160, run some cattle, maybe sheep. The grazing up here is good. I don't know anything about cattle. I do, and you know how to build. Between us, we can make this work. You're talking like we have years. We do have years. He said it with such certainty she almost believed him. We're going to have years and years. Rose is going to grow up here. We're going to expand this cabin into something real. And one day, he stopped, shook his head. One day we're going to look back and wonder why we ever thought this was impossible. You sound sure. I am sure. How? Because you survived Marcus leaving. You survived building this place alone. You survived childbirth in a blizzard with no help. He stood, came to sit beside her on the bunk. If you can survive all that, we can survive anything. Alina wanted to believe him, wanted to take that certainty and wrap it around herself like armor. But she'd believed before. Believed Marcus when he said they'd build a life together. Believed the frontier would be kinder than the cities she'd left behind. Belief had gotten her nothing but scars. I'm afraid, she admitted, I'm afraid you'll wake up one day and realize this isn't enough, that I'm not enough. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. I do. He reached out, cupped her face gently. Look at me. I spent 30 years trying to be enough for my father. Enough son, enough heir, enough Calder. And it was never sufficient. There was always something else I needed to be, someone else I needed to become. But when I'm here, with you, I don't feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm finally doing something right. This is going to be hard. I know. Harder than you think. I know that too. He smiled. But I'd rather have something hard and real than something easy and empty. Rose started crying, a thin, insistent wail. Alina shifted her, started the awkward process of nursing. Everything about motherhood felt foreign and terrifying, but the baby latched on and the crying stopped, and that felt like a small miracle. Rhett watched them, expression soft. You're good at this. I have no idea what I'm doing. You're keeping her alive. That's good enough. For now. Wait until she's older and realizes how badly I'm screwing this up. We'll screw it up together. The word hung between them. We. Not you, not I, but we. It should have felt presumptuous. They'd known each other less than 3 months. He'd just shown up. She was still legally married to someone else. But instead it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in years. We need rules, Alina said. If we're doing this. All right. What kind of rules? First, you sleep over there. She pointed to the far corner. We build you a proper bunk tomorrow, but tonight you take the floor. Done. What else? Second, this isn't charity. You work, I work. Everything gets divided equally. Agreed. Third, if you change your mind, if this gets too hard, if you wake up and realize you made a mistake, you tell me. You don't just disappear like... Her voice cracked. Like Marcus did. Rhett took her hand. I'm not Marcus. Prove it. I will. Every day for the rest of my life, I'll prove it. He squeezed her fingers. What else? That's it for now.
This
We'll figure
story
out
was
the rest as
posted
we
on the
go.
channel West of
Fair
Betrayal.
enough.
Please do not repost
He
it
stood,
in any form.
started gathering blankets for a makeshift bed on the floor. For what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier about finding Marcus, getting the divorce papers. He could be anywhere. Then we'll search everywhere, however long it takes. He looked at her over his shoulder. I want to do this right, Alina, not hide or pretend. I want, when we're finally free to choose, I want to marry you properly. The words hit like a fist to the sternum. Rhett, you don't have to answer now or ever if you don't want to. But I needed you to know this isn't temporary for me. This isn't some adventure I'm going to get bored of. He struggled for words. This is the rest of my life, if you'll have me. Alina looked down at Rose, sleeping now with milk-drunk contentment. Looked at the cabin around them, solid and small and real. Looked at Rhett, waiting for an answer he said he didn't need but clearly wanted. Ask me again when we're both free, she said finally. When the divorce is done and we've survived a year of this, ask me then. And will you say yes? I don't know. She met his eyes, but I want to find out. That seemed to be enough. He smiled, finished making his bed, and stretched out on the floor like it was the most comfortable place in the world. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Alina lay awake longer, Rose warm against her chest, and tried to imagine a future where this worked, where Rhett didn't leave, where they built something that lasted, where Rose grew up with two parents who'd chosen each other instead of being trapped together by circumstance. It seemed impossible. But then again, so had building the cabin. So had surviving childbirth alone. So had everything she'd done since Marcus left. Maybe impossible was just another word for not yet done. The next morning, they started the work of building a life. Rhett rode to town for supplies while Alina rested and cared for Rose. He came back with lumber, nails, a small stove that would heat better than the fireplace, and enough food to last them through winter. He also brought news. The whole county's talking about the ball, he said, unpacking supplies. Half the people think I'm insane. The other half think I'm a hero for standing up to my father. What do you think? I think I don't care what they think. He set down a sack of flour. But there's more. Elizabeth's father has put up a reward for information about where she went, $500. Alina's stomach dropped. Someone will talk. Someone already did. James's cousin sent a telegram, said the father hired Pinkertons. They'll be in California in a week. Can they run? They're going to try. Cousin's got connections, thinks he can hide them until things cool down. Rhett shook his head. Rich people. Can't stand the idea of their children making their own choices. Your father's rich people too. I know. That's how I know what he's capable of. He looked at her directly. He might come here. Try to convince me to come back, or try to... He stopped. Try to what? Make trouble for you. Claim you seduced me or manipulated me. Try to get you thrown off your land. He can't do that. I have the deed. He can make it hard, real hard. Rhett's jaw tightened. Which is why we need to be prepared. We need to make this place as solid and legitimate as possible. File the expansion claims I mentioned. Get witnesses to say we're working the
This
land
story
properly.
was posted on the
Build a
channel
life
West
so real
of
that no
Betrayal.
one can tear it apart.
Please do not
And if
repost
that's
it
not
in any
enough,
form.
Then we'll deal with it when it comes. He crossed to her, crouched down so they were eye level. But I need you to know, whatever my father tries, I'm not leaving. He can threaten, he can bribe, he can send the whole damn army. I'm staying right here. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice, and I'm choosing you. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm that was exhausting and strangely normal. Rhett built the second bunk, then started work on an addition that would give them another room. Alina recovered slowly, helping where she could, nursing Rose every few hours, learning the terrifying responsibility of keeping another human alive. Rose was a good baby, considering. She cried when she was hungry or cold, slept in short bursts, and spent her waking hours studying the world with those serious dark eyes. Alina talked to her constantly, explaining what she was doing, why she was doing it, what kind of world she'd been born into. Your timing was terrible, she told Rose one afternoon while Rhett was outside cutting logs. You couldn't have waited until spring? Had to be born in the coldest month of the year? Rose just stared at her. Yeah, you're right. Timing's never been our strong suit. She adjusted the baby's blanket. But we're here, and we're alive. And that man outside who's building us a bigger cabin, he's not your father, but he wants to be. Is that okay with you? Rose yawned. I'll take that as a yes. Outside, Rhett was working with single-minded intensity. He was up before dawn and working until dark, driven by something Alina couldn't quite name. Part of it was practical. They needed more space, needed to prove they were serious homesteaders. But part of it felt like penance, like he was trying to prove through sheer physical labor that he'd made the right choice. On the 15th day after the ball, Thomas Calder came to the cabin. Alina saw him first, a lone rider coming up the trail at midday when Rhett was down by the creek hauling logs. She knew who it was before she could see his face. Something about the way he sat his horse, the way he moved through the landscape like he owned it. She met him on the porch, Rose bundled against her chest. Thomas Calder looked like an older, harder version of his son. Same dark hair going gray, same sharp eyes, same stubborn jaw. But where Rhett had warmth beneath the toughness, his father was all ice. Mrs. Voss, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Mr. Calder. Is my son here? He's working. Then I'll wait. He dismounted, tied his horse to the porch rail. We have things to discuss. I don't think Rhett wants to discuss anything with you. What Rhett wants is irrelevant. I'm still his father. Thomas climbed the porch steps, and Alina had to force herself not to back away. May I come in? No? His eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You heard me. This is my land, my cabin, and you're not welcome here. I see. He looked her over, taking in her worn dress, the baby, the rough-hewn cabin behind her. So this is what my son threw everything away for, a pregnant widow and 40 acres of rock. 40 acres that I own, that I built on, that nobody can take from me. Everything can be taken, Mrs. Voss, with enough money or enough force. Is that a threat? It's a fact. He pulled something from his coat, papers, folded and official-looking. These are dissolution papers. My lawyer drew them up. If Rhett signs them, he gives up all claim to the Calder Ranch, the Calder name, and any future inheritance. In exchange, I'll give him $5,000 and a letter of recommendation to any ranch that will take him. He doesn't want your money. He'll want it when winter gets hard, when that baby is crying and there's no food and this cabin is freezing. He'll remember what he gave up and he'll hate you for it. Then that's between him and me. No. Thomas stepped closer. It's between him and his birthright, between him and everything I built for him. You think you're doing him a favor? You're destroying him. I think you're the one who destroyed him, spending 30 years telling him he wasn't enough unless he became exactly what you wanted. Thomas's face went hard. You don't know anything about raising a son, and you don't know anything about letting one go. She shifted Rose, who was starting to fuss. Rhett made his choice. He walked away because staying was killing him. If you can't see that, then you're blind. I see perfectly well. I see a woman who's trapped my son with guilt and obligation. You see what you want to see. Alina cut him off. Because actually, seeing Rhett, seeing who he is instead of who you want him to be, would mean admitting you failed him. I gave him everything. Except freedom. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Thomas stared at her, jaw working, and for a moment she thought he might hit her. Instead, he shoved the papers into her hand. Give these to Rhett. Tell him the offer stands for 1 week. After that, he turned toward his horse. After that, I'll make sure every person in this territory knows what kind of woman he's living with. Every sordid detail, where you came from, how you trapped him. By the time I'm done, nobody will hire him, sell to him, or acknowledge him. You'll both be pariahs. We already are, Alina said quietly. And we're still here. Thomas mounted his horse, looked down at her.
This story was
You think you've
posted on the
won.
channel west
But
of
winter's
Betrayal.
long, Mrs. Voss.
Please do not
And love doesn't
repost
keep
it
you
in
warm
any
when the
form.
snow's 10 feet deep and the food's running out. He'll come crawling back. They always do. Then he rode away, and Alina stood on the porch, shaking with rage and fear in equal measure. Rhett found her there 10 minutes later, still holding the papers. Was that my father? He was breathing hard, like he'd run up from the creek. Yeah. What did he want? She handed him the papers. He read them slowly, face going darker with each line. $5,000, he said finally. He thinks that's what I'm worth. He thinks that's what it'll take to make you leave. He's wrong. Rhett tore the papers in half, then quarters, then let the pieces scatter in the wind. I'm not signing anything. Not for $5,000, not for $50,000, not for the whole damn ranch. He's threatening to ruin us, spread rumors, make it so no one will work with us. Let him try. We don't need the whole territory. We just need this land and each other. Rhett, be realistic. I am being realistic. He took her shoulders gently. My father thinks the worst thing that can happen is losing money and reputation. But I've already lost both, and you know what? I'm happier than I've been in years, because for the first time, I'm living my life instead of his. That happiness won't last when we're starving. Then we'll starve together. He pulled her close, careful of Rose between them. Stop trying to make me leave. Stop trying to convince me this is too hard. I know it's hard. I don't care. Alina pressed her face against his chest and tried to stop shaking. I'm scared. Me too. But you don't show it. Because one of us has to pretend we know what we're doing. He kissed the top of her head. Might as well be me. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the cold and the fear and the weight of Thomas Calder's threats. Rose slept between them, oblivious to the war being waged over her small, fragile life. When they finally pulled apart, Rhett looked exhausted but determined. We need to get ahead of this, he said. Whatever rumors my father spreads, we need to control our own story. How? We go to town, together. Let people see us. Let them see Rose. Let them make their own judgments instead of believing whatever poison my father feeds them. They'll judge us anyway. Probably, but at least they'll be judging the truth instead of lies. He touched Rose's tiny hand. And the truth is, we're a family. Maybe not a conventional one. Maybe not one the law recognizes yet, but a family nonetheless. You really believe that? I do. He met her eyes. Do you? Alina looked at Rhett, then down at Rose, then at the cabin behind them. She thought about what family meant, not blood or law or other people's approval, but choice, the deliberate daily decision to stay, to build, to fight for something that mattered. Yeah, she said finally, I do. Then that's all we need. He was wrong, of course. They'd need food and money and luck and 100 other things to make it through winter. But in that moment, standing on the porch of the cabin she'd built, holding the daughter she'd birthed, facing down the future with a man who'd chosen her over everything else. In that moment, it felt like enough. They went to Coldwater 3 days later. The trip took most of the morning, Rhett riding his horse while Alina sat behind him with Rose bundled tight against the cold. Every bump in the road sent pain through her still healing body, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing. They'd agreed
This
to
story
face the
was
town
posted
together,
on the channel
and backing
west
out now
of
would
Betrayal.
only prove Thomas
Please do not
Calder right.
repost it in any
The
form.
whispers started before they even reached the main street. Alina felt eyes on them from every window, every doorway. Saw curtains twitch, faces peer out, mouths moving in conversation that stopped the moment they got close enough to hear. By the time Rhett tied the horse outside the general store, a small crowd had gathered across the street, pretending not to stare. Ready? Rhett asked quietly. No. Me neither. He helped her down, careful of Rose. But we're doing it anyway. The general store fell silent when they walked in. The clerk, a man named Peterson, who'd always been civil to Alina before, looked between them with barely concealed shock. His wife, the woman who'd made the widow comment weeks ago, stood by the fabric counter with 2 other ladies. All 3 were staring. Mr. Calder, Peterson said carefully. Miss Voss. Mrs. Voss, Alina corrected. She was still technically married, even if Marcus was gone. The distinction mattered. Right, Mrs. Voss. Peterson cleared his throat. What can I do for you folks? Need supplies, Rhett said. He pulled out a list they'd made. Flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, and fabric if you've got it. Need to make more blankets for the baby. At the word baby, all three women's eyes snapped to Rose. Alina pulled back the blanket slightly so they could see. Let them look, let them judge, let them see that Rose was real and healthy and loved. That's... Mrs. Peterson's voice was tight. That's your child, Mrs. Voss? She is. Born when? 3 weeks ago. The women exchanged glances. They were calculating, Alina realized. Counting backwards, trying to figure out if the timeline matched Marcus's departure, trying to determine if the scandal was worse than they'd thought. She's beautiful, one of the other women said finally. It sounded genuine, which surprised Alina more than an insult would have. Thank you. What's her name? Rose. That's lovely. The woman stepped closer, and Alina recognized her now, Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house. May I? Alina hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Chen reached out, let Rose's tiny hand wrap around her finger. The baby cooed, and something in Mrs. Chen's expression softened. She's strong. Good grip. She looked up at Alina. You delivered her yourself? I did. That's, Mrs. Chen shook her head. That's either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. But she's healthy? You're healthy? We're surviving. That's more than most can say. Mrs. Chen released Rose's hand, stepped back. You've got more courage than I'd have in your position. It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't condemnation either. Alina would take it. Peterson started gathering supplies, and the women drifted into quiet conversation. Alina caught fragments, alone in that cabin. The Calder boy actually left. His father must be furious, but none of it felt malicious. Curious, maybe. Shocked, certainly, but not cruel. Then the door opened and Thomas Calder walked in. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Thomas stopped when he saw them, jaw tightening. For a moment, nobody moved. Then he walked to the counter like they weren't there, like Rhett wasn't standing 3 feet away. Peterson, he said, need to place an order for the ranch. Yes, sir, Mr. Calder. Right away, sir. Peterson was suddenly all nervous energy, pulling out his order book with shaking hands. Rhett didn't move, didn't acknowledge his father, just kept his hand on Alina's back, steady and warm. Heard you've been spreading stories, Thomas said, still not looking at them. About the Voss woman. The room went deadly quiet. Haven't spread anything, Sigton Peterson said quickly. Just people talk, Mr. Calder. You know how it is. I do know, and I know the difference between truth and slander. Thomas finally turned, looked directly at Alina. Truth is, she's a married woman living in sin with my son. Truth is, that baby she's carrying around was fathered by a man who abandoned her. Truth is, she's destroyed my family because my son's too blind to see he's being used. That's enough, Rhett said quietly. Is it? Because I've been quiet for 3 weeks while you embarrass this family, while you throw away everything I built. I think I'm entitled to speak truth in my own town. It's not your town. It's not your family anymore. And it's definitely not your business who I choose to be with. You're my son. I was your son. Past tense. Rhett's voice was level but hard. You threw me out. Told me never to come back. So I'm not coming back. But I'm also not letting you poison people against Alina because you're angry at me. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. Same thing. From you. Thomas's face darkened. You think you can make it out here? With no money, no connections, no future except what that woman lets you have. I know I can, because I'm not alone. You're more alone than you've ever been. Wait until winter really hits. Wait until the money runs out. Wait until she gets tired of poverty and finds another man with more to offer. Thomas gestured at Alina. She's already done it once. Alina felt the words like a slap, felt every eye in the store turn to her, waiting for her response. She could defend herself, explain what really happened with Marcus, try to make them understand, but she'd spent too long explaining herself to people who'd already made up their minds. "You're right," she said instead. "I did choose Marcus, and he left, just like your son chose to leave you. Maybe the problem isn't the people who leave, Mr. Calder. Maybe it's the people who make leaving feel like the only option." Thomas stared at her. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to wake up every day knowing you're living someone else's life instead of your own, to be told who you should be, what you should want, how you should feel." She shifted Rose, who was starting to fuss. "And I know what it takes to walk away from that, to choose freedom even when it costs everything. So yeah, I understand your son better than you think, because we're the same. We'd both rather starve on our own terms than feast on someone else's." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mrs. Chen started clapping. It was slow, deliberate, and within seconds the other two women joined in. Peterson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but even he was nodding slightly. Thomas Calder stood frozen, fury and shock warring on his face. "I think," Mrs. Chen said, "that's the most honest thing I've heard in this town in 20 years. "Agreed," one of the other women said. "And for what it's worth, Mr. Calder, your son looks happier than I've ever seen him. Maybe that counts for something." Thomas didn't respond, just turned on his heel and walked out, leaving his order unfinished. The door slammed behind him, and slowly the store returned to life. Peterson finished gathering supplies with shaking hands. The women went back to examining fabric, but now they included Alina in their conversation, asking about Rose, about the cabin, about what she needed. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. When they left an hour later, supplies loaded on the horse, Rhett was quiet. "You all right?" Alina asked. "Yeah, just that was harder than I expected. Confronting your father? Watching him try to destroy you." He helped her mount, handed Rose up to her. "I knew he'd be angry, but hearing him talk about you like that, he said what he needed to say. Doesn't make it true. But it hurt. Everything hurts lately. That was just one more thing." She settled Rose against her chest. "Did you see Mrs. Chen's face when she clapped? I thought she was going to start a riot." Rhett laughed, and the tension broke. "You made an ally there." "Maybe, or maybe she just hates your father more than she hates scandal. I'll take it either way." They rode home in comfortable silence, and when they reached the cabin, Rhett immediately started unloading supplies. But Alina saw the way his shoulders were tight, the way his jaw was clenched. The confrontation had cost him more than he wanted to admit. That night, after Rose was fed and sleeping, Alina found him sitting outside despite the cold, staring at nothing. "Talk to me," she said. "Nothing to talk about." "That's a lie, and we both know it." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "I keep thinking about what he said, about winter getting hard, about you finding someone better." "You think I do that?" "No, but I think—" He stopped, rubbed his face. "I think he planted doubt, and now I can't stop wondering if he's right, if I'm dragging you into something that's going to destroy us both. You're not dragging me anywhere. I chose this." "Did you? Or did
This
you just
story was
accept it because
posted
you
on the
didn't have
channel
another
West
choice?"
of Betrayal. Please
Alina
do not
sat down
repost
beside
it
him,
in any
close
form.
enough that their shoulders touched. "You want to know the truth? When Marcus left, I was terrified. Not because I loved him. I stopped loving him months before. But because I had no idea how to survive alone. No skills, no money, nothing but stubbornness and spite." She paused. "Then I built the cabin. And I realized I'm stronger than I thought. Strong enough to survive anything, even being alone forever. Then why am I here? Because being strong enough to survive alone doesn't mean I want to." She took his hand. "I could have told you to leave. Could have told your father I'd send you back. But I didn't. Because having you here doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. And I'm tired of pretending being alone is the same as being free." Rhett turned to look at her, and even in the dark she could see the emotion in his eyes. "I'm going to mess this up. Probably. And you're still willing to try? I've already messed it up a dozen times. Seems only fair you get some turns. She squeezed his hand. We're not perfect, Rhett. We're not going to have some fairy tale ending where everything works out smoothly, but we're here, we're trying, and that's more than most people get. What if it's not enough? Then we'll deal with it, together. She stood, pulled him up. Now come inside before we both freeze and Rose wakes up to find us dead on the porch. That's not the kind of childhood memory we want to give her. He followed her in, and they didn't talk about it again. But something had shifted. Some unspoken agreement that doubt was allowed, fear was allowed, but giving up wasn't. Winter deepened, and with it came challenges they hadn't anticipated. The expansion on the cabin stalled when temperatures dropped too low to work with mortar. Rhett's hidden savings ran lower than expected. Rose developed a cough that lasted 2 terrifying weeks before finally clearing. And the isolation, the sheer relentlessness of being alone on the mountain with only each other, wore on them both. They fought. Not often, but when they did, it was vicious. You're being stubborn about this, Rhett said one afternoon in February. They were arguing about whether to slaughter one of the chickens he'd bought or keep it for eggs. I'm being practical. We need the eggs more than we need one meal. We need protein. You're still recovering. You need to eat. Don't tell me what I need. Someone has to, because you won't admit when you're struggling, and you won't admit when you're wrong. I'm not wrong about this. You're always wrong. That's your fundamental problem. It escalated from there, both of them saying things they didn't mean until Rhett grabbed his coat and walked out. He was gone for 3 hours, and when he came back, Alina was holding Rose and crying. I'm sorry, they both said at the same time. Rhett crossed the cabin, wrapped his arms around both of them. I shouldn't have pushed. I shouldn't have snapped. Alina pressed her face against his shoulder. I'm so tired, Rhett. Tired of being scared. Tired of not knowing if we're going to make it. We're going to make it. How do you know? Because we have to. Because Rose needs us to. He pulled back, looked at her. And because even when I'm furious with you, even when we're fighting and broke and freezing, I'd still rather be here than anywhere else. That might just mean you're insane. Probably. He kissed her forehead. But I'm insane with you, so it's fine. They kept the chicken. It died 2 weeks later anyway, and they ate it then. Spring came slowly, grudgingly, but it came. The snow melted. The creek ran high with runoff. Rhett planted the seeds he'd bought, wheat, corn, vegetables, and they spent long days in the field, Rose strapped to Alina's back, learning to work the land they'd claimed. In March, a letter arrived from California. Elizabeth and James had made it. They'd gotten married under false names, were working at James's cousin's ranch, were building a life far from the expectations they'd fled. Elizabeth wrote that her father had stopped looking after 3 months, that she was happier than she'd ever been. She wants to know if we're married yet, Rhett said, reading the letter. Not yet. Why not? Alina looked up from where she was weeding. Because I'm still legally married to Marcus. We could find a lawyer, file abandonment papers. With what money? I could... He stopped. They both knew he couldn't. They were barely scraping by as it was. It doesn't matter, Alina said. We don't need a piece of paper. I want to marry you properly. Why? So we can prove to people we're legitimate? So your father can't call us sinners? She stood, brushed dirt from her hands. I don't care what people call us. I care that we're here, that we're making it work. The rest is just words. Words matter. Not as much as actions. She walked over to him. You've been here 5 months. You've worked this land, helped raise Rose, chosen me every single day. That matters more than any ceremony. But nothing. When we're ready, when Marcus is found or declared dead, when we have the money for lawyers and papers, then we'll do it properly. Until then, we're together. That's enough. It wasn't enough for Rhett, she could see that, but he dropped it because they had bigger problems to solve. The bigger problem arrived in May. Marcus Voss showed up on their doorstep. Alina was inside with Rose when she heard voices outside. Rhett's, sharp and angry, and another she hadn't heard in over a year but would never forget. She went to the window, and there he was, thinner than she remembered, dirty, swaying slightly like he was drunk or sick or both. She handed Rose to the blanket she'd spread on the floor and walked outside. Marcus turned when he heard the door. His eyes went wide. "Alina, get off my land. I need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about." She crossed her arms. "You left. You took our money and ran. We're done." I know I did. And He swayed again and Rhett caught his arm. Marcus shook him off. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was scared and stupid, and I thought she was my chance at something better." "She who?" "Caroline. The woman I left with." He laughed, bitter and broken. "Turned out she was already married. Took my money and disappeared in Denver. Left me with nothing." "And you came back here for what? Sympathy?" "I came back to ask for forgiveness, to see if we could—" He looked at her, really looked, and saw Rhett standing close, protective. Saw the cabin, larger now than when he'd left. Saw Rose through the open door. "You have a baby." "I do." "Is she—" His face went pale. "Is she mine? Does it matter? I'm her father." "No," Rhett said quietly. "You're not." Marcus's eyes snapped to him. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the one who was here when she was born. The one who's been raising her. The one who's going to keep raising her after you leave. I'm not leaving. This is my land too. My wife." Marcus took a step toward Alina. "We're still married, Alina. Legally. That means I have rights." "You have nothing." Alina's voice was ice. "You abandoned me. Abandoned us. Any rights you had ended the day you left. The law doesn't see it that way." "Then we'll change the law." Rhett moved between them. "But you're not staying here. You're not taking anything from her. Not again." "You can't keep me from my own property." "The property's in my name," Alina said. "Only my name. You checked, remember? Before you left. Made sure there was nothing here worth taking except the deed itself." Marcus's face twisted. "Then I'll contest it. I'll tell everyone how you've been living in sin with this man while you're still married to me. I'll make sure you lose everything." "Go ahead. They already know. They already judge. You can't threaten me with something I've already survived." She walked closer, close enough that he could see how much she'd changed, how much harder she'd become. "You want to know the truth, Marcus? Leaving me was the best thing you ever did, because it forced me to become strong enough to survive without you, strong enough to build this, strong enough to choose what I want instead of settling for what I can tolerate. And what do you want? I want you gone. I want a divorce, and I want to never see you again. I don't have money for lawyers. Neither do we. So we'll do it the frontier way." She went back inside, came out with papers she'd been saving for months, abandonment documents she'd had drawn up in town. "Sign these. They declare you abandoned me and forfeit all claims. I'll file them, and in 6 months we'll be legally divorced. And if I don't sign, then I tell the sheriff in Coldwater about the money you stole. The savings that were partly mine. That's theft, Marcus. You could hang for that." It was a bluff. She had no proof, no witnesses, but Marcus didn't know that, and he was desperate enough to believe it. He
This
signed the
story
papers
was
with
posted
shaking
on the
hands.
channel west
"I
of
really
Betrayal.
am sorry,"
Please do
he
not
said,
repost it
handing
in
them
any
back.
form.
"For all of it." "I know, but sorry doesn't fix anything." She folded the papers carefully. "There's a stage to Denver that leaves tomorrow. I suggest you're on it." He left without another word, walking down the mountain like a ghost of the man he'd been. Alina watched him go and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no relief, just the quiet certainty that a chapter of her life had finally closed. Rhett came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You all right?" "Yeah, I think I am." She leaned back against him. 6 months, then we're free." "Then I can ask you properly?" "Then you can ask me properly." 6 months later, on a cold November morning, the divorce was finalized. Rhett proposed that afternoon. They were in the expanded cabin, 2 rooms now, with plans for a third. Rose was 13 months old, walking with unsteady steps and talking in fragments that only they could understand. The ranch was small but profitable. They'd made it through winter, through poverty, through every challenge the land and their pasts had thrown at them. "Alina Voss," Rhett said, dropping to one knee in the middle of their kitchen, "will you marry me?" She looked at him. This man who'd given up everything, who'd stayed through every fight and doubt and moment of fear. This man who'd delivered her daughter and built her home and chosen her every single day for almost 2 years. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." They married a week later in Coldwater. It wasn't a grand ceremony, no fancy dress, no elaborate party, just the two of them, Rose, Mrs. Chen as witness, and the circuit judge who happened to be passing through. They said their vows in the boarding house parlor, and when the judge pronounced them married, Mrs. Chen cried. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said, wiping her eyes. Two people who actually chose each other instead of settling for what was expected. "Neither did we," Alina admitted. They had dinner at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen's treat, and when they rode home that evening, Rose asleep between them, Alina felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of problems. They still had debts, still had hard winters ahead, still had the daily struggle of making the ranch work. But they had each other. They had Rose. They had land they'd fought for, and a cabin they'd built, and a future they'd chosen instead of accepting. That night, lying in bed with Rhett's arm around her and Rose sleeping in the next room, Alina thought about strength. For so long, she'd thought strength meant standing alone, meant never needing anyone, never asking for help, never admitting weakness. She'd built her entire identity around that idea, that accepting help made her weak, that depending on someone made her vulnerable. But she'd been wrong. Real strength wasn't isolation. It was knowing when to ask for help. It was accepting support without losing yourself. It was building something with someone else that neither of you could have built alone. Real strength was choosing partnership instead of pride. "What are you thinking about?" Rhett asked quietly. "How wrong I was about everything." "Everything?" "Most things." She turned to face him in the dark. "I thought surviving meant doing it alone. Thought accepting help made me weak. Thought choosing you meant giving up some part of myself. And now? Now I know choosing you was the strongest thing I've ever done. Because it wasn't about need or desperation or having no other options. It was about recognizing that we're better together than we ever were apart." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for not letting me push you away. Thank you for eventually letting me stay." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in her life, Alina understood what it meant to be home. Years passed. The ranch grew. They expanded to 160 acres, ran cattle and sheep, built a barn and a proper house to replace the original cabin. Rose grew up wild and strong, learning to ride before she could properly read, more comfortable in the field than in town. Thomas Calder never reconciled with his son. He died 3 years after the wedding, leaving the ranch to distant cousins who promptly ran it into the ground. Rhett inherited nothing, and he claimed he didn't care. Alina thought he probably did, somewhere deep, but he never said so. Elizabeth and James had 3 children in California. They wrote occasionally, their letters full of sunshine and oranges and a life that seemed impossibly distant from the Montana winters. The town of Coldwater slowly accepted them. Not enthusiastically, but with the grudging respect reserved for people who'd survived when they shouldn't have. Mrs. Chen became Rose's unofficial grandmother. Other families started buying cattle from them. By the time Rose was 10, the scandal of her parents' beginning had faded into just another story people told about the old days. On Rose's 15th birthday, she asked about Marcus. They were sitting on the porch of the big house. The original cabin was a storage shed now, watching the sun set over land that had once seemed impossibly hostile and now felt like the only place any of them could imagine living. "Was he a bad man?" Rose asked. "My birth father?" Alina considered the question carefully. He was a weak man, and weakness made him do bad things. "Do you hate him?" "No, I'm grateful to him, actually." Rose looked shocked. "Why?" "Because if he'd stayed, if he'd been strong enough to keep his promises, I never would have become who I am. I'd still be that scared girl who let other people make her choices. And you wouldn't have your dad. She nodded toward Rhett, who was down by the barn with the hands. So no, I don't hate him. I just hope he found whatever he was looking for. Do you think he did? I don't know, but I know we found what we needed. Rose was quiet for a moment, then, I'm glad you didn't give up. When it got hard. Me too, sweetheart. Dad says you're the strongest person he's ever met. Your dad's biased. Maybe, but I think he's right. Rose stood, stretched. I'm going to help with the evening feed. She ran off toward the barn, all long legs and fearless energy, and Alina watched her go with something like wonder. This child, this fierce, confident, unbreakable child, had been born in the middle of a storm into a world that didn't want her. And she'd grown up loved and secure and utterly certain of her place in the world. That was the real victory. Not the land or the house or the successful ranch, but Rose. Proof that breaking all the rules and choosing the hard path could still lead somewhere worth being. Rhett climbed the porch steps, settled into the chair beside her. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. How far we've come. Regretting any of it? Not a single second. She took his hand, laced their fingers together. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Why especially? Because they taught me something I never would have learned otherwise. What's that? She looked at him. This man who'd ridden through a blizzard to save her, who'd given up everything to stay with her, who'd proven every single day for 16 years that love was a choice, not a feeling. That commitment was action, not words. That family was what you built, not what you were born into. That strength isn't about standing alone, she said. It's about knowing who's worth standing beside. He smiled, brought her hand to his lips. Took you long enough to figure that out. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn. Good thing we've got time. They sat on the porch as the sun set over their land, the land Alina had claimed when she had nothing, the land they'd built on together, the land they'd pass to Rose someday. And Alina thought about all the women out there still believing that survival meant isolation, still thinking that accepting help meant surrendering strength, still afraid to choose partnership because they'd confused dependence with connection. She wished she could tell them what she'd learned. That yes, you had to be strong enough to survive alone. That part was true, but surviving alone wasn't the destination. It was just the foundation. The real work, the real strength, came in deciding what to build on that foundation. In choosing who to build it with. In recognizing that letting someone stand beside you wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing you could do. Because being alone was safe, predictable, controllable. But being together, really together, with someone who'd seen you at your worst and stayed anyway, that was terrifying. It required trust and vulnerability and the constant, daily choice to keep showing up even when it was hard. And it was worth it. Every fight, every doubt, every moment of fear, all worth it. For this. For the house they'd built, and the daughter they'd raised, and the life they'd chosen instead of accepting what they were given. For the simple, profound knowledge that they'd both found exactly what they needed when they'd stopped looking for easy and started looking for real. That night, lying in bed with Rhett's breathing steady beside her, Alina thought about the woman she'd been 17 years ago. Pregnant, abandoned, standing in front of an empty piece of land with nothing but anger and an axe. That woman had been convinced her
This story
strength
was
came
posted
from
on the
needing
channel
no one.
west of Betrayal.
She'd been wrong.
Please do not
Her
repost
strength
it
had come
in
from
any
building
form.
something worth protecting, from choosing to let someone help her, from recognizing that the opposite of alone wasn't weak. It was human. And being human, being connected, being part of something larger than yourself. That was the whole point. The frontier had taught her how to survive, but Rhett and Rose had taught her how to live. And in the end, living was the harder skill. The better one. The one that actually mattered. Outside, the wind moved through the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow and possibility. Somewhere out there, other women were making the same choice she had. To stay or to go. To fight or to surrender. To stand alone or to reach out. She hoped they'd choose reaching out. She hoped they'd learn what she'd learned. That you didn't have to choose between strength and connection. That the strongest thing you could do was admit you couldn't do everything alone. that asking for help didn't make you weak, it made you brave. And bravery, Alina had learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to keep going despite it. Choosing to build despite the uncertainty. Choosing to love despite the risk. It was swinging an axe when you were 9 months pregnant because the alternative was giving up. It was accepting help when every instinct screamed to push people away. It was saying yes when someone asked you to build a life together, even though you'd been abandoned before and might be abandoned again. Bravery was showing up every day, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And as Alina drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in the house she'd built with her own hands and shared with the people she'd chosen, she understood something fundamental about the human experience. We weren't meant to stand alone. We were meant to find the people worth standing beside. And then we were meant to build something together that neither of us could have built alone. That was the whole point of survival, not just making it through, but making it through to something worth having. Rose's laughter drifted through the window from where she was still working in the barn. Rhett stirred beside her, pulled her closer in his sleep. And Alina called her, no longer Voss, no longer alone, no longer afraid, closed her eyes and let herself rest. She'd earned it. They all had.